which is actually our very own Srikant Tirumala, who's going to be in conversation with Mr. Vipul Tulli. Um, this is a session where we're going to be talking about the future of sustainable and renewable energy.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vipul. I'm very happy to have you here. By the way, today we are going to talk about a topic that is very dear to me, future of sustainable and renewable energy. And by the way, the dear all, firstly, thank you for joining us for this interesting session. I am Srikant Tirumala, your host for this morning. I'm a founder and CEO of Hooper Labs, and I'm the TS 2021 Speaker Committee Chair as well. Today, I'm really happy to introduce you to a very eminent and an amazing gentleman, Mr. Vipul Tulli. I just want to give you a brief background of Mr. Vipul. He is the managing director of Sembcorp Energy India Limited, the Indian subsidiary of Sembcorp Group. He also heads Sembcorp South Asian business and oversees Sembcorp's investments, and is a key stakeholder in relationships in India and Bangladesh as a CEO of South Asia. Okay, he has been associated with Sembcorp Group since 2015 in various capacities, including role of chief executive officer and country head in India as managing director of Sembcorp Thermal Business in India, and as the head of group strategy and Sembcorp Industries. One more very important background that Mr. Vipul holds is a senior partner with McKinsey and Company and worked there for over 25 years. And he was able to help build and lead Asian energy practice, and his experience is really huge in span of power generation, fuel management, upstream oil and gas refining, marketing and distribution. In addition, he's heading the Sembcorp's Indian business with Mr. Tulli also chairs the power committee at FICCI. So, I mean, his resume goes on and on. He has a degree from IIT Delhi, and I'm Calcutta as well. So I'm really honored to have him here. By the way, for those of you who don't know about Sembcorp, I just want to share, it's one of the leading energy and urban development player in the Asian regions especially, and driven by its purpose to do good and play its part in creating sustainable future. In fact, Sembcorp has a balance of thermal and renewable energy portfolio of over 12,600 megawatts with more than 3,000 megawatts of renewable energy capacity globally. And in fact, one key thing we need to note is Sembcorp has invested more than $4 billion into India as one of the largest foreign investments in the energy sector. I mean, Mr. Vipul, we are very honored to have you here. I mean, really, it's a pleasure. I got to talk to you in the morning today, and I'll tell you, I was very impressed, and I was thinking it was a privilege that I got a chance to be able to talk to you and get your insights and your experience in the area of energy. And I'll probably dive right into a few questions that I have that are very dear to my heart. Energy is a very important sector that needs immediate attention. It is going through a huge transformation, as all of us know. But if you notice, only 10% of the energy is renewable right now. That is, I mean, in wind and solar, if you exclude hydro. Can you just give me a brief perspective based on your own, thoughts in a decade from now? What is your vision of the world in terms of source of energy distribution? Do you believe it will be 20, 25%, 50% or more? I mean, do you have just kind of a plan ahead that you think will work out for us as a humanity? I mean, can you share something on that, Mr. Vipul?
Well, first of all, namaskar and hello. Hi, Srikant, and hi to the audience. Thanks a lot for having me. Thanks to TIE to invite me. Great pleasure to be here. You're right. This is actually one of the most exciting sectors and one of the most exciting times in this sector. The kind of transition that is going on in energy today is probably has very few parallels in human history. This kind of transition of this extent of fuels, of capital, of way of working, of way of consuming is changing quite very, very dramatically. Where does the 10% of today go to in a decade from now? And that's crystal ball gazing. I would say maybe 20 to 25%. And but that's, to those who think that's a low number, I would say look at that number in perspective of the fact that energy demand will be growing in that period. Today, renewable energy supplied, not capacity, but energy supplied is well below 10% if you take overall for the world. And to double or go more than maybe 2.5 times in 10 years in a growing market is a very, very significant shift. So we're really bang in the middle of a very massive transition.
On that, I wanted you to probably even give an insight. I know with your background and technology as well, right? What do you think are the key technology aspect that's going to make that transformation happen from 10 to 25% with that increasing demand that you just mentioned about? What could be
there are many factors. Technology is one of them, and we can talk at length about technology. I think probably the most significant factor actually in that transition is actually public perception and customer perception. So people today are very conscious about climate change. People want a cleaner planet. People want more sustainable energy, and that's actually changing entire institutional frameworks to change. Now, what's happening is, for instance, financial institutions are changing. So whether these are providers of equity capital or providers of debt capital, they're changing towards very rapidly from carbon-based form of energy to less carbon-based forms of energy. That shift has happened very dramatically, I would say, even in the last 12 to 24 months. It's accelerated. Technology of course, has not only played its role in terms of providing the avenues for this to happen, but I would say even technology has always surprised. If I look at the last 10 years, it's surprised on the upside every time. So what technologies? Longer discussion, but I would say the core of it is really 3 or 4 different technologies. One would be just the basic efficiencies and scale of solar photovoltaic. The second, I would say, is the scale and efficiencies of wind turbine generation. The third, I would say, is a whole range of transmission technologies, which are allowing transmission to be more reliable and to be more to reduce transmission losses. Fourth, I would say, is a whole range of digital technologies that are coming into each and every every one of these stages. And underpinning this and emerging for the future are a whole range of storage technologies.
Got it.
Whether that's batteries or that's pump storage or that's hydrogen going forward and so on. So I would say this is a very, very both financially and technologically underpinned transition.
Very, very nice. Well, I think that's good to hear, actually. But do you think 25% is good enough as a humanity in, say, 15, 20 years from now? Would you be happy with it?
I would say if we can get to 20-25% in 10 years, the grounds would have been laid to get to a much higher number in 20 years.
Okay. So
because remember, if you think about industries and physical assets, the energy sector, if you take oil and gas and power together, the energy sector is the one sector that has the highest, which has the largest assets in the world. No other sector is this one. And so what we are actually looking at is the largest invested sector in the world transitioning. And in that transition, a 20-30 year period is actually the blink of an eye.
Okay.
And so if we are able to get to 20-25% in 10 years, that will only happen if the technologies, the commercial frameworks, the financing frameworks, the consuming customers have transitioned. After that, it will be, my view is it will actually be accelerating.
Much faster. Okay, excellent. Great insight. That was very useful, actually. And coming to this, we kind of discussed in the back stages when we were you and I about DISCOMs, right, having challenges to be able to go and distribute at the last mile, and their financial viability and their ability to actually collect their bills, probably, to be able to meter their consumers effectively. How big a challenge you think, especially even post-COVID, right? They were significantly into losses, probably, and government is also trying to do something in terms of trying to subsidize or probably reduce their debts and also go ahead and give different kinds of financial incentives. I was just wondering, what do you think of it to do you think that would go away in the short term, or is it slowing down the whole process of energy transition that you would see in the future? Just wanted to get your insights on that as well.
Look, I think I won't be very wrong if I was to say that DISCOM reforms today is the weak link in the sector. It may not be a palatable thing to hear, but it's the truth.
Right.
Now, before we get all pointing fingers at the DISCOMs, I think let's also keep in mind that DISCOMs are nothing but a reflection of us.
Our intent, I guess.
DISCOMs today, it's very clear that the energy sector of the future needs DISCOMs of the future. It can't be the DISCOMs of the past.
Okay.
Now, the fact is that DISCOMs today, in many, many cases, if not most cases, there are few very, very exceptional performing DISCOMs, which are exceptions. I'll leave them aside. But the bulk of our DISCOMs today, whether we like it or not, are institutions that reflect political agendas of the country. Political agendas are what the people of the country wish to have.
Correct.
In a democratic system. Now, if we are, to me, if we are to fix this weak link and get our DISCOMs of the future, we have to be able to demand through our democratic processes, through our institutional and administrative processes, that the DISCOMs move from being instruments of political agenda to being institutions of commercial delivery, of commercial performance, of energy transition performance. If we are able to do that. Now, whether we achieve that through privatization, whether we achieve that through government ownership, whether we achieve that through some very well running government administrators, all of that can be debated ad nauseum, and there'll be different models. India is a very heterogeneous country. Many models can exist.
That's right.
But by and large, history has shown, or at least the last 10, 20 years experience has shown, that the private model of running the DISCOMs, which provides better insulation from the political agendas, it forces us to provide that insulation, is perhaps a more successful one. So we do have, this is the weak link, and we really have to fix it. Because the kind of intermittencies that we're talking about in renewables, the kind of storage we talked about, where the kind of massive new technology injections, massive new capital injection that needs to go in, cannot happen if any organization is cash flow wise running on life support.
Got it. Would you probably put an analogy to telecom industry? You think in some capacity, what we were in the past?
Telecom was easy compared to this one.
Okay. Yeah. But
at least telecom, you see, is at the end of the day a central subject.
That's right. Yeah.
And the technology in the telecommunications industry today allows wireless, so you can actually bypass the entire plain old telephone system infrastructure, which is what really got the revolution.
That's right.
That does not yet exist in electricity. Of course, wireless transmission of electricity, the technology has been around for a long time, but it's not really a viable technology.
That is true. I understand. Very nice, actually. I wanted to ask you, what are the innovations and technologies that are in the forefront, both on generation and transmission? I think you kind of touched upon it. Another question, actually, this Mr. Saurav from your company had very rightly pointed out. I just thought I will probably ask it: how to democratize a real cost of renewable power generation for sustainable and viable renewable generation in the country. How do we democratize?
Let me take both of those questions, actually. Maybe the one thing I'd like to add on the technology point. And it's useful for entrepreneurs like your audience and the many young professionals to actually understand the intensity of the technology content that goes into this industry. sometimes we get very excited about fintech, or we get very excited about software, or we get very excited, all of which have a lot of innovation going on. But if you look at the combination of hardware, software, and fundamental chemistry and physics innovations that go in across the energy sector, okay, just to give you a sense, in basic generation, we talked about solar panels. Now, the size, efficiency, manufacturing tolerances of solar panels today are night and day compared to what they were even 5 years ago.
5 years ago.
The panels today are nothing like the panels 5 years ago.
That's right.
The wind turbine generators manufactured today are, at a hub height of, let's say, 140, 145 meters is the nacelle. After that, you've got blades with a diameter of 150 meters diameter. That's like, 2 football fields this thing is covering. And this sort of equipment is being hit by everything from cyclones to wind to dust to lightning to everything, and it's got to perform. In fact, the more it gets hit, the more it performs.
Okay.
So we're talking about that level of innovation. In storage, we talk about lithium-ion batteries, but today things are moving towards iron batteries, flow batteries, aluminium chemistries. We're looking at fuel cells, etc. Right? Even technology back at the customer interface, whether it's multi-utilities combining steam, power, efficiency, and transmission at the industrial entities in a factory, or combining in a building, combining much higher HVAC efficiencies with heat pumps, with solar panels on the roof, with recycling of wastewater, etc., with batteries. There is just, the sky is the limit on the innovation that can actually happen. You look at the transmission lines. We used to, 10, 15 years ago, 200,000 volt transmission used to be the norm. Today, it's 400, 600, 800, 1,000, a million volt type of transmission, right? How do you reduce losses? How do you do grid support through fast response systems, which when renewables suddenly stop producing because, there's a rain or the wind stops or the cloud covers the sun, how do you quickly ramp up? All sorts of innovations are required. So frankly, the sky's the limit. You said something very interesting when we were talking, that almost any one of these insights is enough to launch 5 companies. I found that a very interesting thing. So I would encourage your members and your audiences to actually look through the sector and join us in that innovation.
I understand.
So that's as far as the technology question is concerned. If you look at democratization of the costs of RE, first of all, I think it's important to recognize that, yes, the cost of RE, while on a unit by unit generated basis, is actually equal to or cheaper today than conventional power. That is true. But unfortunately, RE doesn't yet give us the power when we need it, where we need it.
All right.
The moment we want to get the power when we need it, where we need it, then it becomes equal cost or more expensive, actually.
Oh God. Okay.
Right now, that's the problem. Now, how do we solve this problem? We solve this problem, I think we have to look at innovation across the value chain. Value chain means manufacturing of equipment, generation of power, transmission of power, distribution of power. Okay. Manufacturing of equipment. There's been massive announcements. Some of the leading companies, including, I see your sponsors, have made big announcements in terms of manufacturing solar equipment. Very, very welcome. And if you think about both the technological and financial potential and opportunities in that manufacturing, it's very immense. All the way from energy intensive process industries like polysilicon manufacturing, ingot drawing, high tech electronics processing like wafer manufacturing, converting those through very high efficiency chemical doping processes into cells, assembly, high tech electronic assembly into modules, and then finally making them into actual panels that show up. All of that needs to be made in India. Today, we are highly dependent on imports, which is not a sustainable thing because ultimately it's energy security. By the way, we have a great example. Well, I would say a good, but also not so good example in the wind industry. India is one of the hubs of wind equipment manufacturing. We have some of the best manufacturers in India. In fact, many of them are manufacturing here and exporting around the world. But Unfortunately, today, many of them are either bankrupt or close to bankruptcy. Simple reason, we have not been able to assure them sufficient, stable, and growing demand. So there's massive manufacturing that's set up, but the demand hasn't come as much, or maybe too much manufacturing got set up. Either way, they're in financial trouble. So I would say, because electricity is really a government policy driven sector, if we are simply able to assure sufficient demand and visibility of this demand, like for instance, China has done a great job of this. Let's just give the demand. Indian industry and entrepreneurs will do the rest. Don't worry. The manufacturing will come. Like in wind, the solar will come at high quality, high class. Yes, it may take 1 or 2 years to get there. That's fine, but they'll rise to the occasion. Okay. Then you look at the discounts we've talked about, in good. So I won't spend too much time there. The other side is the transmission. Transmission today is free for renewables across states, and that's good. It's a classic example of a subsidy that is provided to kickstart the industry.
Got it.
Now, this won't be there forever, but costs will also come down by the time the subsidies goes away. But this transmission grid that we have in the country, which is called the national grid, typically it's the 400,000 volt and above voltage level, which interlinks the states. It is actually one of the most amazing engineering assets in the world. Right? I would not be wrong in saying very few, if any, countries has a grid the kind that India has made. Right? And so to be able to simply say, I will put on power into the grid and it will be drawn, 4,000 kilometers away. And if some source of energy goes down or is unable to generate, the others will automatically just slightly ramp up their position.
Understand.
Compensate for that. Or if there's more wind in one part, the others will automatically go down slightly. That is the power, and that's the way our grid operates every second of the day.
I understand.
So this is, in a sense, it's already across the country. But if we are to democratize, the DISCOMs have to really be able to perform, and the manufacturing has to be able to perform. We'll have these, we'll get the costs, and we'll get the kind of energy security.
I'm actually, I have to probably take a diversion from my other questions I had. Is what you just said actually puzzles me and disturbs me actually at the same time. The puzzle is, we hardly speak about this kind of strengths that you have, the merits that you have, because the wind energy that you mentioned just now, I mean, the grid that we have at that scale, and you mentioned they're world class, and coming from you, I know it is the truth. And I was wondering, do we really speak about that? Do we go ahead and have a dialogue around it to be able to make it a reality on what we already have? I'm really kind of finding it that why do we go through a traditional struggle when we have such amazing assets already? It's like almost an install base that we already have, and we are not leveraging it to the fullest. It feels very unfortunate, and I just wanted to see, any comments on that side? Do we have enough dialogues on this nature? Do we have platforms to be able to discuss, to be able to really get the word out, to be able to make sure we leverage as much as we can? That's something, Vipul, you would like to comment on it?
That's a very astute observation, Srikant. I don't know how many of you are aware, but hardly 20 years it's taken for India to go from roughly zero renewables to, we just crossed 100 gigawatts of capacity, 100,000 megawatts we crossed last month.
That's right.
From almost zero, there was hardly anything before 2000.
Yeah.
Right? And we went from almost 0% of demand to just under 10% of demand today for ourselves, right? And so I do agree, there is some amazing work going on. I think somehow, I think the positive view of that is that maybe we are just so busy trying to get to the next horizon that we don't sort of talk about it. But if I had to do a self-critical view, I would say that somehow the issues that we are facing on front-end DISCOM viability and issues on tariff viability, sometimes those filter in or seep into the other parts of the value chain, right? If your customer is not viable, then you will always be struggling and you'll always be either dealing with very high risk or something. So that sometimes casts a pall, but I have absolutely no doubt that what you're saying is a very important thing, that actually what this sector has created is nothing short of amazing.
I somehow feel that it needs a panel by itself. What I mean is not in this session. I'm talking about a platform by itself where this is debated really seriously, because, looks like we have everything, but we don't have enough of it to converse about it. That's what I feel.
No, and surely there's a lot going on also. There's a lot of investment coming into the sector today. I won't be surprised if this is the sector which I can't be sure of the numbers, but I'm pretty confident that it's certainly the largest or one of the top 2 or 3 sectors attracting foreign direct investment. Right. Today, India is the third most attractive country for renewables in the world, and this is the reason.
That is
because there's transparency, there's competition, there's no sort of discrimination whether you're a local player or you're a foreign player. All these are good things.
That's true.
Yeah.
So very good. Actually, on another note, I wanted to ask you. I mean, like in food, I know sometimes we end up buying organic food, right? When I go and drink my water, I see for mineral water, and I'm willing to pay more for it, right? I mean, it is at least that consumer awareness in especially the urban areas have kind of seeped in, where we demand what we want and we get what we want. Why can't it be like I have an app? I'm just telling you, I mean, this is a hypothetical app where I push a button and I say, I want solar energy and I don't want this fossil fuel kind of an energy, and I get it. And by the way, he's going to say, this is going to cost you another $10 more or $5 more or 50 cents more. I don't know what it is, but and I'm willing to pay for it. That kind of an awareness, consumer awareness, can we expect it in a country like India, at least in the cities, with a younger population that we have today?
What if I tell you it's already possible today?
And my question, what I'm saying is the possibility, how do we make it ubiquitous and in terms of people seeing it every day? I don't see it yet as an individual.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. I think the fact is, I mean, jokes apart, it is already happening today in the industrial consumer market or the commercial consumer market. So today, as a renewable energy producer, I am able to go in some states, we'll come back to that later, but in some states, I'm able to go to an industry or a company who says, look, I have made a commitment to my global investors that I will only buy renewable power. So yes, if it costs me a little more, never mind, I will buy. And by the way, there's a list of 100 companies that have declared this as the RE100 list. By the way, there are thousands others who have made similar ambitious commitments. And so today, in many states of the country, in a few states, I would say, of the country, like Karnataka, maybe Tamil Nadu, to some extent Gujarat and so on, you're able to actually reach that customer and say, I've set up a solar farm or a wind farm, and I'm supplying you, I'm paying the charges to the grid, and you pay me for the electricity. So it's possible today. Now, how to make it ubiquitous? That is the core of your question.
Correct.
That's the fun of it.
I would like to see. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was thinking, like, if I were to look at my statement, right, my electricity bill, I need to know how much of it came through wind and how much came. I mean, can it ever happen? I mean, can I imagine something happen?
It's very easy to happen. Yeah. So let's take it in 2 steps. First step to my mind is if you really want to move the needle.
Yes.
The needle will be moved in terms of the big commercial and industrial customers. Right. So first of all, we have to be able to support the government when it says, I want to almost force or compel the DISCOMs to allow renewable energy to directly reach the customers who want it. Without making it very difficult in terms of charges. And that's one. That will itself, change the game. Then it comes to the individual consumer. At the individual consumer level, I can tell you today, the DISCOMs have the technology to be able to say, okay, Mr. Srikanth, if you want to only pay for renewable power, I can make it happen on a bill today. The billing systems exist. Each DISCOM, by the way, buys somewhere between 10 to 20% of its power as renewable power today.
Got it.
Today. So if you say, I only want renewable, he can tell you, okay, if you want only renewable, then I can pay to you, but then you'll have to pay a little bit more.
I understand.
Because of the variability, etc. Because you can't just use green and then the rest of my grid who pays for it. Fair enough. And then you can make your choice depending on what the systems exist today.
Correct.
So please go demand it from your DISCOM. And enough consumer forums demand it, it will happen. The systems exist. The ability to supply exists.
Understand. Yeah. I think it needs to be debated in schools and colleges. I think probably that's where it should start. Probably and homes, and I don't know where, but because that awareness is going to naturally shift the demand for us to be able to produce more. I know.
Just taking a slightly
just
to add a perspective, it is taking a slightly larger perspective because they will all India is such a heterogeneous country.
Yeah,
there will be some people who are at the forefront of affordability, they're able to pay and they want to pay.
That's true.
There are others who are, even if they want it, it's a lower priority because they are more in survival mode.
Okay.
So, and we have all types. That's the beauty of the country.
That's
now, right. My sense is that, therefore, while awareness of climate change issues and pollution and health-related issues is actually very widespread. You'll be surprised, with the communication these days, it's very, very widespread. But the question really is willingness and ability to pay.
That's right.
So given that, I think it comes back to the question of that we have to choose a speed of transition that makes sense for us. One, because of the ability to pay. Just to give you an example, in Germany, for instance, typical domestic retail tariffs of power are, if I translate them into Indian rupees, about 25 rupees per unit of electricity.
Okay.
What do we pay in India?
Yeah.
4 to 5 rupees.
That's right. 4 to 5. Yeah.
5 times. Now,
5 times.
Maybe you can do another 5-7 rupees addition just for cost of living and all the PPP adjustment and all these things. But at the end of the day, you're still, 3 to 5 times the cost. And that cost is coming largely because of the additional costs of variability, additional transmission, So we can't afford to make that transition that fast. That a country like Germany has done with its very vast financial reserves and so on. So we have to be able, plus remember, Germany has access to gas, a lot of offshore wind, etc., etc. We don't. We are still coal dependent. We have a little bit of hydro, which we are building out. So that transition for us has to be gradual. My point would be simply we do 3 things. One, as you said earlier, publicize and make the awareness more. Number 2, ensure that the consumer tariffs, to start with, at least are cost reflective. At least they reflect the true cost. Don't subsidize. At least get consumers used. When you go to, PVR for a movie, you pay your cost now.
Absolutely, that's right.
So electricity or all, please pay.
Correct.
And the third thing I would do is I would say, to the extent that there are some subsidies required for a transition period, for the additional cost of renewables, let the central government provide those subsidies in a transparent way for a certain period. And within that period, costs will come down and things will even out. And these 3 things can actually make a big difference.
Excellent point, Mr. Vipul. I mean, I think you said it right. I think that the change has to happen. I think I have work to do after this, personally as well. I'm going to go after that. If you were to, you mentioned if you were to take an ideal model in terms of a country or a region, which is a benchmark of where you think the world has to go, do you have anything in mind that you'd probably suggest saying, look at these countries which are doing so well in energy and probably we need to follow suit, so to be able to, they set an example for where we as a world has to go. Any country that comes to your mind?
I think India's the size of a continent all by itself.
That's right.
India is a pretty unique country. We should set our own benchmarks. That doesn't mean that individual things can't be learned from individual countries. Of course they can. But my own sense is the heterogeneity, the scale, and the ambition in India is such, we have to set our own benchmarks. Now, to my mind, to set that benchmarks, I would say, keep financial viability of assets at the forefront of policy making. Don't push either manufacturers or generators, or indeed, if you're transitioning from conventional energy to renewable, please remember you'll still need conventional and even more conventional in the coming years to support until the costs really make sense. So make sure that financial viability happens, number one. Keep it at the forefront of policy making. Encourage competition. I think India has done a fabulous job maybe even too good from an industry's point of view in terms of encouraging transparency and competition, but encourage competition. It makes things better. And reform the discoms. Do these three things, okay? The strength of India's entrepreneurs, okay? The attractiveness of the scale of the market will take care of the rest.
Got it. Yeah.
Don't worry. Keep things transparent and competitive. Make sure that ultimate customers, the discoms, are viable, and make sure that the policies are not such that you come in and suddenly you find policies change and you're not viable anymore. Take care of these three things.
Yes.
There is more than enough interest in the world and in entrepreneurship in India, money in the world and entrepreneurship in India to build out this transition.
Very nice. What is your take on hydrogen as an energy, an alternate energy source?
Next 5 years will tell. I think a lot of very interesting pilots are being done now. I think one thing that is increasingly clear is, and I have to be a little careful because technology sometimes changes, but at least where we are sitting today, it looks like perhaps green hydrogen will trump blue hydrogen.
Okay.
Which means the cost of basically taking clean energy, putting it through very, very cheap electrolyzers and generating hydrogen will actually be the cheapest form of creating that. Then the question is, how do you figure out the transportation beyond that? Now, many interesting technologies. The Japanese are working on some things. The Europeans are working on other things. Ammonia is one very interesting thing that the Indian government seems to be getting quite interested in, and maybe even skewing the policies towards. So there are many interesting things piloted. So I think the next 5 years will tell, but expect a lot of action in the next 5 years.
Okay, excellent. I would have one more question on research. Do you think investment of money on research in India towards energy, do you feel it is good enough, or do you think we can do better?
We can do better.
Yeah, I mean,
look, I'll tell you, it comes back. I don't want to belabor the point, but fundamentally, it comes back to this question of financial sustainability.
Yeah,
we have to be able to, if we are creating a long-term sustainable model, then we have to leave our companies, whether it's our developers or our manufacturers.
Yeah.
We have to leave them with enough margins to say, okay, there is headroom for me to breathe and think and invest.
That's right.
Because yes, the startups have a very important role to play, and a lot of energy and money comes into that, but it can't all happen there. A large part of that also happens, even if the innovation is in the startups, that has to come in and be tried and tested and piloted and so on by the companies. So you have to leave, as I mentioned in the case of the discoms earlier, companies or sectors or subsectors that are, gasping for oxygen, liquidity oxygen, cannot do R&D.
Yeah,
you have to leave that headroom.
I got it. Very nice. I'll now switch from energy to your company. I wanted to find out, right, TIE is known for its entrepreneurship. It was started in Silicon Valley almost 20 plus years ago. By the way, this was when I was an engineer in the Bay Area. When I was an engineer, that's when TIE started in 1993, 94. So I was just wondering, as a SEMCOP, how do you engage with startup ecosystems? Do you partner with them, and do you go out and co-innovate with them in any capacity? Have you been doing it, or do you do it more often? Just a question for us to be able to understand how SEMCOP works with startup communities.
Yes, no, we've been doing it traditionally, and I think we will be doing more of it in the future. What have we been doing traditionally? One, we actually have an investment through an arm's length vehicle that actually invests in startup technologies. Besides that, we do a lot of screening of technologies which are constantly looking, as from all around our operations around the world, we have a way to screen these technologies. We actually have a very high quality offshoot committee of our board that's called the Technology Advisory Panel, which are some of Singapore's brightest minds in diverse fields that just sit once every 3 months and just look at technology and what should we look at, what should we invest in, what should we encourage. Traditionally the model has been to provide, once we've screened technologies and we find something promising, to allow our facilities, wherever relevant, to be used as test beds.
Okay.
So one of the things that we provide is test bed, because as any entrepreneur in technology would know, that's the toughest
Very
thing.
important.
You can develop it, but use concurrent.
Correct, correct.
I think that's one thing we've traditionally provided. I can certainly say for our business here in India, we are absolutely ears open for any interesting technologies. We were one of the early adopters of drone technologies, both in our conventional and renewable businesses. We are always happy to look at ways to increase productivity of our turbines. We are constantly looking for new digital innovations, looking for new efficiency or maintenance innovations that are going on. If there are innovations around storage, innovations around construction methodologies, etc., we are all ears. So we have a whole range of plants today. We have 35 plants around the country today. 3 more under development. And we are very happy to constantly use parts of these plants as test beds.
Sure.
So all years.
That's very encouraging. Right, Vipul, I mentioned earlier as well, I'm from Hyderabad. I was born here. And from Telangana, I just wanted to go ahead and ask you, do you have any plans in Telangana to be able to, do you have any active role that's going on and any future plans? Just curious.
Yeah, Telangana is our biggest customer.
Okay.
Telangana is our biggest customer. So we like Telangana. And of course, future investments always depend on, viability of the district and so on. But we have an office there, we have staff there. And it's, I love Hyderabad.
Okay. So, by the way, I want to thank you for a wonderful session. I think I learned so much, and you have actually intrigued me in what little I've been doing. I would like to go ahead and probably stir up my mind to see what more I can do to be able to contribute to get some clean energy around our corners, of neighborhoods as well. And any final note from your side, Vipul, before we probably, call it a day and probably we take another session, because you mentioned you are very good in, technologies is some another day, right? Maybe some other session, some other day. I would like to probably pique your mind to be able to figure out more about technologies. But any final note that you would like to give our audience?
Srikanth, I think the only, maybe one parting note I would have, especially for the younger professionals and younger entrepreneurs in your audience, right? Sure. Which is that if you think about the energy sector, particularly the electrification side, because of decarbonization, urbanization, electrification, these three trends. Because of this, there is no more exciting sector for young people in the world today, no matter what kind of work you want to do. Okay, and I'll explain what I mean. If you want to do tech, you want to do deep innovations, you want to do deep innovations in chemistry, physics, maths, manufacturing, digital, whatever you want to do, the tech innovation is there. You want to work in manufacturing and scale, unparalleled build out of size and scale is going on with a very high quality bar, very low tolerance for failure is going on. You want to work in that sector? We have enough opportunities. You want to work in financing? This is where the biggest financing flows are going, debt or equity. The biggest, the most innovative products, whether in hedging, whether in risk management, whether in currency management, etc., is happening in this sector. You want to work in startups? You want to work in big organizations, you want to work in R&D, you want to work in funds, it's all there in this sector. So please, if you want to broaden your horizons and really be part of this, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, what you tell your kids, be prepared to tell them that you worked in really changing the face of the planet.
So, Mr. Vipul, it was an amazing final note. Very encouraging. I think actually it has given people an avenue, as you mentioned, right? 5 startups can start from the dialogue that you gave me in the last 2 minutes. And really happy to have you here. It was a great pleasure, and I learned a lot. And we look forward to talking to you again. Thanks from the entire TIE fraternity. And we look forward to meeting you in person. If you're ever in Hyderabad, please drop in. We'll be honored to go ahead and host you. And we'll look forward to talking to you further, Mr. Vipul. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Srikanth and Vipul, for such an engaging discussion on the future of renewable energy.